All right. And let's go ahead and give us the cue to go live, and so that Commissioner Matthews can start with the script.
We're ready.
All right. Commissioner Matthews.
All right, thank you so much. California Racial Equity Commission Data Committee meeting is called to order at 3 p.m. on Thursday, February 20th. Commissioner Pastor is unable to attend at this time, so I will be the committee lead for this data committee meeting. If Commissioner Pastor is able to be in attendance at any point, he will resume as committee lead. As we begin today's virtual meeting, we will begin with a few reminders. Second, as we continue to engage guest speakers, presenters, and the public, we want to name that the information and opinions expressed by presenters or public commenters before the commission reflect the views of the speaker. They do not necessarily represent the views of the commission or the governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation.
Recording in progress.
Additionally, as a public body, I'm hearing an echo. One moment.
If you could mute your, thank you.
All right. Additionally, as a public body, public comment is critical to the work of the commission, and we allow public input at all meetings. However, we stand united with other Californians in condemning hate and recognizing the harms that hate causes. The hate act is a hostile expression or action committed in whole or in part because of a person's actual or perceived identities, characteristics, including race, color, disability, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender, including gender identity, and or because that person is part of a protected group. The rich diversity among our population in California is one of our state's greatest assets, and we are committed to supporting and protecting all people in California. As a reminder, if you are a victim or witness to hate, racism, or bullying, you can report the incident and receive free support through the California VS Hate Resource Line. This hotline will help you identify next steps and help connect you to resources including legal, financial, mental health, and mediation services. Report hate by calling 833-8-NO-HATE or visiting cavshate.org. We'll have the land acknowledgement. I would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we're all over, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we call home. And we encourage you to find ways to support your local indigenous community. We at the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation join you all from Sacramento, California on unceded Nisenan tribal land. The Nisenan people have remained in relationship to these lands through ceremony, culture, and stewardship since time immemorial. We would also like to acknowledge the Maidu people to the north, the Valley and Plains Miwok peoples to the south of the American River, and the Patwin Wintun peoples to the west of the Sacramento River for their continued relationship with this land. We acknowledge that we are on the tribal lands of Sacramento's indigenous peoples. Our agenda for this meeting covers 8 agenda items. We have hard copies of the agenda available at the physical space located at 1400 10th Street, room 103, Sacramento, California. Materials are also available online at racialequity.lci.ca.gov. Dr. Estes, can you please provide a brief overview of the agenda for this meeting?
Thank you, Commissioner Matthews. Before you is the public meeting agenda. One change that we do have on the agenda that was posted was it listed Augustine Ariola as the person that would be facilitating public comment and providing information on how to provide public comment. That has changed, and the person that we have with us today is Atia Feiruz, who will be helping us go through the public comment process. Otherwise, the agenda is as stands. We will be having a panel discussion with several subject matter experts on data visualization today. We will try to take a break, and if we can, squeeze in 2 short breaks. But the idea is really to get to some key considerations and facilitated conversation with the committee that is present. And that will be facilitated by our esteemed consultant Joyce Chow. Back to you, Commissioner Matthews.
Thank you so much. Atia Fairuz, Assistant Information Officer of the Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, will lead the roll call to establish a quorum and provide an overview of the public comment process. Atia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let's get started with roll call. Commissioner Matthews,
Here.
Commissioner Pastor, Commissioner Yolanda Richardson.
Here.
Thank you. We have at least 2 out of 3 commissions here with us today. That means we have achieved quorum. For today's meeting, the committee is following the teleconference rules for advisory bodies outlined under Governor Code 11123.5, which allows members to participate remotely under these rules, and committee may vote on proposed actions to bring to the full commission. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm here to provide guidance on the process of virtual meeting, which we have designed with the intention of maximizing access by members of the public. For those joining the webinar online via Zoom or by phone, please note that your microphone is automatically muted when you join. To minimize the risk of background noise, you will not be able to unmute yourself. For those joining via Zoom, please note that the webinar platform doesn't enable video for attendees, so we will not be able to see you. If you need technical assistance during the meeting or have a question about the meeting process, there are a few ways to contact us. If you're online via Zoom, the best way is by using Q&A function with several members of the Racial Equity Commission team monitoring it. If you're joined by phone and you have access to email, please email racialequitycommission@opr.ca.gov. To make a public comment, either in person or online, you can submit an online public form. You will need to submit a public comment card for each item you wish to speak on. If you plan to make public comment virtually, you must be online via Zoom, either through the webinar or phone options. To submit an online public comment form, visit racialequity.lci.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form linked there. You will need to complete a separate form for each item on which you wish to speak. You may complete a form at any time during this meeting. When Chair Matthews opens the floor for public comment period for your item, we will call on your name. When you hear your name, please raise your hand to do this online in the Zoom webinar. Click raise hand under participants menu, and by phone, you can raise your hand by pressing asterisk and then 9. When it is your time to speak, a member of our team will unmute your microphone. You will be online and you'll see a window pop up alerting that the host is unmuting you. You will need to click the option to approve unmute. After that, you can begin your comment. If you are joining us via your phone, you will hear a recorded message alerting you that your line is unmuted. You can begin your comment once your line is unmuted. Each speaker will have a maximum of 2 minutes to make their remarks. Speakers requiring or using interpretation services are allocated 4 minutes to facilitate full participation. If you're online, you will see a timer pop up on your screen. Please monitor that and wrap up your remarks accordingly. Whether you are online or via phone, Chair Matthews or staff will notify you when your time is up. After that, we'll mute your microphone. You do not need to take any additional steps. If you're unable to complete the online form, but would like to make a public comment, please email us. Thank you, and back to you, Chair Matthews.
Thank you for those great details, Atia. We will now take any public comments related to agenda item number 1, the welcome. Back to you, Atia, if we have any public comments.
Give us 1 minute to check for public comments. As a reminder, you may submit a virtual public comment card by visiting racialequity.lci.ca.gov/meetings and completing the public comment form link there. Members of the public joining us from members of the public joining from our viewing room today can also complete this online form at the staff table in the viewing room. You will also need to submit a public comment card for each item you wish to speak on. As of right now, we have no public comments, so I'll give the mic back to Chair Matthews.
Thank you so much. We will move on with agenda item number 2. Before we move into the rest of our agenda items, we will first take any public comments on items not on the agenda today. Are there any public comments for items not on the agenda?
No comments as of right now.
Okay, thank you so much, Atia. We will now transition to agenda item number 3, the consent calendar. The consent calendar for this meeting includes the approval of the July 17, 2024 meeting minutes. Are there any comments, questions, or discussion from the commission? If you do have any comments or discussion or none, please share verbally since I'm unable to see everyone. Commissioner Richardson, I believe you're the only other person who could potentially weigh in on this one.
The minutes are fine. Thank you, Commissioner Matthews. I think I need to figure out how to work these, but we're good.
Fantastic. All right. If there are no comments, questions, or discussion, before we call for a motion, we will first take any public comments related to this agenda item. Are there any public comments?
There are no public comments for this agenda item at this time, but we can give that a minute.
As we're waiting, a quick question for Doug Bojack, our attorney. Given that we have 2 commissioners here and you need a motion in a second, are we able to do that with this size of committee, though it may be a quorum?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any public comments, Atia?
Not at this time.
Okay. And I will ask for the motion. May I have a motion to
So
approve
moved.
the consent calendar? All right.
So moved.
I will second. Atia, could you please take the roll call vote?
Yes. Commissioner Matthews,
Yes.
Commissioner Pastor, Commissioner Richard,
Also,
Sure.
yes. Also, yes.
thank you. Back to you, Chair Matthews.
All right. Thank you so much. Don't see any action items required by staff from this agenda item. We will move forward to agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4 is a panel discussion on data visuals used as a tool to advance racial equity. That will be moderated by our Executive Director, Dr. Larissa Estes, Executive Director of the California Racial Equity Commission. For this discussion, we are joined today by several esteemed panelists. Dr. John Swabish, who I understand is on the East Coast. Thank you for joining us. I know it's later there. Senior Fellow at the Urban Institute. Andrea Aguiar, Racial Equity Manager from the Office of Racial Equity and Social Equity at the City of San Jose. And my good friend, Sophia Garcia, Equity and Civic Nonprofits Lead, Environmental Systems Research Institute, or ESRI. Thank you all so much for being here to share your insights with us. Dr. Estes, I will pass it over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Commissioner Matthews. We're really excited for today's panel, which will focus on data visualization as a tool to advance racial equity. Data graphics, as we know, are not often translatable to the general public or across a variety of languages. And the goal of this discussion is really where the opportunities and actionable steps that we can take to look at how data visualization can be applied in support of racial equity initiatives, tools, and methodologies. I'm really excited about the panel that we have arranged for you today, and I'll give a bit of a bio before we jump into a handful of questions. with our wonderful speakers. So we have Dr. John Schwabis, as you shared, a senior fellow with the Urban Institute, where he's a researcher in the Income and Benefits Policy Center and a member of the Institute's communications team. Dr. Schwabis is considered a leader in data visualization and an advocate for clarity and accessibility in research. Andrea Aguiar is currently the Racial Equity Manager for the Office of Racial and Social Equity at the City of San Jose, California. Andrea has 13 years of experience in both the local nonprofit and government sector and has a diverse experience in local government ranging from public health, city management, human resources, and housing. And Sofia Garcia is Esri's lead in equity and civics nonprofit. Her work at the Dolores Huerta Foundation has laid the groundwork for institutionalizing Esri's equity and mapping work. Sophia's GIS career has been focused on participatory community GIS and implementing GIS with an equity lens. We're excited to have our panelists with us today, and really our format for the day is a couple or an intro question, a specific question to each of our panelists, and some closing question to allow the commission to have some dialogue with our panelists. So the first question that we have, and this is for everyone, we know that data visuals can actually take really complex data and present it in a clear format. In your experiences, and I'm going to start with actually you, Sophia, how does data visualization influence public perception and the understanding of racial equity issues?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for having me. Oh no, can everyone hear me?
You're good.
Okay, I want to start off by thanking Dylan, who works with the Racial Equity Commission, and her work with emailing all of us. And I just want to say thank you for the commissioners for having us, and just the work that you do at the state of California. I've been lucky to be able to attend some of your meetings virtually and in person. I just want to start off with that. But as with your question, and I think a lot of my comments today will be around data visualization, but specifically geography and maps. So I do work for Esri, and we are a software company that specializes in GIS mapping or geographic information systems mapping. And we are, the state of California is a great partner of ours. But on your specific question, how can data influence public perception? So I also want to ground and say that all like data problems are geographic problems. And so everything can be visualized in a map. And I also want to say that in my experience, and I think what we're also seeing federally and in some other state and local governments, is that data can purposely be confusing. You can have maps, you can have bar charts that are purposely in language that is meant to confuse the public. However, I think one of the best ways that the commission, and I also want to highlight some of the work that is being done in the state of California. So a lot of my answers will be grounded in examples. And again, Dylan will send all of you the information from myself and other panelists. So I want to uplift two California state existing equity index maps. One is the Cal EnviroScreen, and they just celebrated their 10-year anniversary of having that be a public resource. And what that does, it's a statewide index that specifically outlays the environmental impacts and environmental indicators that are happening across the state. And it's just a really wonderful visual. I have it open on my computer right now. What I'm seeing is immediately see green and red. And when we're thinking about, again, that understanding of how the public can understand that information, and when we're trying to visualize data to different communities, people see red and green, and immediately your eye goes to, well, red is bad. So what does that mean? And so even that visual impact allows you to really investigate that and start a conversation, whether you are English speaking and Spanish, Tagalog, whatever your main language is. The other map I wanted to highlight is from the California Air Resource Board, or CARB. And that is another map that is an available public resource to the state. And so there are air resource boards and councils across the state that can report their air quality data. And another piece that I want to highlight for this specific map is they work with community members to ask and say, is this data correct? Are we missing something? Is there an outage, or is there a specific air quality that the data at the state level is not collecting? Traco and I, we both live in the city of Bakersfield in Central Valley of California, historically have really poor air quality. And so to have, one, that map exist at the state level, and then two, allow for that community input is a really strong and great resource that we have. And so I just wanted to uplift those examples and then ground and say that maps are just a really wonderful visual, but that again, as GIS professionals and as folks who have careers in data and specifically at the intersection of equity, we need to keep in mind, and I have kept in mind, how are we presenting this data, and are we doing it in a way that's digestible and not? And I'll just add that is, I think, the great thing about working with our equity practitioners, our community organizers, and community organizations, that we're able to have those conversations together. So I'll end it there. But again, thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you, Sophia. And real quickly, what does GIS stand for? Just so we're clear on acronyms.
Yes. Yeah, okay, thank you. GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems, or you kind of equate GIS with maps. So yes, thank you for that question.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you for lifting up California Air Resources Board. At our September Community Engagement Committee meeting, we actually had Chanel Fletcher from CARB talk about their community engagement strategy and how it reflects in how they've looked at data within looking at the air quality. So great connection there. John, I'm going to pivot to you. Do you want to, what's your take on the influence of public perception and understanding racial equity?
Sure. Thanks, Larissa. Commissioners, thank you for having me. It's a little bit later here on the East Coast, but you know, it's before the hockey game, so it's all good. That's all that really matters tonight. Yeah. So I think I agree with everything Sophia said, even the abbreviations. I would add. I guess I would walk through three things that I would encourage folks to think about. So first, Sophia mentioned sort of graphics and graphs and visualizations that mislead people. That's obviously a concern in our age of misinformation and malinformation, disinformation. I would add just more generally the idea or the concept of deficit framing when it comes to data visualizations. If you think about creating a graph, for example, that might have, you know, pick your metric, and maybe it's a bar chart where you have 4 bars, one for 4 different racial groups or ethnic groups. You can frame or describe what's in that chart in very different ways, right? You might say, for example, let's say it was mental health, rates of mental health diagnosis in prisons or jails. You could have a very descriptive, innocuous, neutral title, might be something like mental health in jail. Well, that doesn't really tell you anything, right? It doesn't tell the reader anything. You could title it, for example, racism in jail, right? If the bars, were in a particular order. You could also say, add a subtitle to that might say something like, you could put it in one direction that would say racism in jail. For example, people of color are less likely to get mental health diagnoses. Alternatively, you might say white people get more mental health diagnoses. So instead, what the deficit framing does is it implies there's fault with a person or a community, as if it is their behavior or something innate to that person that results in this outcome, where instead we can think about not just asset framing, what's good about a person or good about a community, but try to better understand how the structures and institutions in this country and obviously elsewhere have contributed to the trends that we're seeing in our visualization. So the first thing I would encourage us to think about when it comes to visualizing data is text, just generally. I think text is so important, but how we use text to frame the visualization and what we want people to come away with it. The second point I wanted to make is very practical, but I think it's a simple thing that everybody can do and think about with their data right away, which is how do you order the results in your visualization, in your chart, in your table, in your map? I'm an economist by training. most of the big social science surveys that are out there, the questions are asked in the same order. The census sort of OMB and the Office of Management and Budget. I'm going to keep my abbreviations in mind here, Larissa. Office of Management, Budget, and Census has sort of set for decades now this sort of order that they collect data, and it's always white people in the first position, then Black or African American in the second, American Indian, Alaska Native in the third, and so on and so forth. And the way those data are collected are then coded in the data 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so what you see a lot in social science research is results that mirror that ordering. And that ordering simply reflects our structures, our institutions that we've built, again, in this country for hundreds of years. And so I think one thing that we can all think about when we are either reading visualizations or we are, in my case, generally creating visualizations, is what is not the right order, because I'm not sure there is a right order, but what is maybe a better order or a more effective order, not just taking what the data, how the data are arranged, but maybe we place the first bar on the bar chart that corresponds to the focus of our story or our report or our dashboard or whatever it is. So for me, that's a very practical approach that people can take when they're looking at visualizations or they're creating them, is just to think a little bit more carefully, a little bit more purposefully about how we're going to order the results or the bars in our visualization. And the last thing I wanted to mention, I know we're sort of focused on racial equity, but I think it would be remiss of not sort of broadening that word, even though I know maybe we're not supposed to. Well, maybe in California it's okay, but in other parts of the country, equity is sort of becoming a bad word. But I would, I'd encourage us all to just expand that definition to, and I'm sure most people on this call are aware of this, but just to remind us, equity around ethnicity, country of origin, accessibility. Sophia just mentioned a graph or map that has red colors and green colors. It's worth noting that many people who have color vision deficiency have difficulties discerning between similar shades. But I'll also say that color is not the only type of accessibility concern we need to think about. And it's not just physical impairments or intellectual impairments that are permanent, right? If I fall walking out my office tonight and break my right arm, it's be hard for me to use the mouse tomorrow during the workday. So how can I navigate a visualization or the web using just my keyboard? So there's a lot of accessibility concerns that also contribute to equity when we think about visualizing data and including everybody when we want to have these discussions around policy topics and social policy topics. So I'll stop there because there's a lot to get to. So, but thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, John, and just lifting up the importance of intersectionality, particularly at how we're looking at data and data visualization. And I really love how we use words and how we frame how we're trying to describe data and how we need to really zero in and focus in on the system, not the person or the community, because that does perpetuate inequity. Andrea, I'm going to turn to you now to answer this question about visualization, public perception, and what's the impact on racial equity issues? I'd love to hear your perspective from a government point of view.
Thank you, Dr. Estes, and to Sophia and John, my panelists. And I actually had the opportunity to do some training with John, and it's bringing up such great memories and training, and to the esteemed commissioners as well. It's a really big opportunity, and especially I'm born and raised from San Jose, and so it's just an honor to be here, with the state of California. Feels very nerdy, but also a lot of pride as well. There's a lot of opportunity with data visualization. And I love what John brought up, right, about the intersectionality. And we very much so in the city of San Jose feel like we've been leading a lot, especially of how we lead with race and how we don't end there and how we really include intersectionality in a lot of ways. But specifically to this question, I think Sophia highlighted a great point, right, about how powerful data can be and that it really needs to be digestible and it needs to be accessible in so many different ways that John highlighted, right? Language, color, screen reader, right? So many different ways that can highlight that it really is for everyone. And when we talk about data visualization and accessibility, we have to think about, right, that there are even federal standards. I know federal standards right now are a very tricky thing, but there are those that exist even regards to how visualization looks like even from an online, especially digitally. And from a city government perspective, data visualization is really important to, our audience is both in administration with elected officials and our community, right? And John brought up a great point about strength-based, because as we're doing data analysis, as we're presenting data, are we presenting data in a way in which we are speaking, right? We are speaking for a community. So are we speaking about them in the way that they want to be spoken about? That's something really powerful that's landed with me that John has taught. And it's we know these narratives, these harmful narratives that have continued in certain areas, right? And it's, are we speaking about this community? Are they okaying with that kind of narrative, right? Or are we coming from a strength base of the resiliency of the continued kind of, these are the communities that have created kind of the cultural fabric of our city, and like the small business, the ethnic small business ownership, right? The retention of home ownership, like all those kinds of things. And speaking to the importance on an elected official front, right? Our elected officials are busy. We know they are, right? I forget how many bills go through the state. I like heard it from one of the lobbyists that work. Like, I'm like, oh my God, the state of California is very busy, and like all the calendars. So they got a lot of things going on. And so we know that data visualization is very powerful to hey, this is what's going on right now. I can get a really quick snapshot, and especially here, like many cities, they like to be rooted in data. So it's saying, okay, wow, this is like the problem that's existing, and this is what's going on. And so that they feel like they can make an informed decision based on what we have. And so the importance of the input of those data, especially, right? It can be great and it can be harmful, right? Because it's, are we telling the story in the way that really highlights that these are these disparities that are going on in our communities, and we really need targeted strategies and investment here, right? We hear from so many, like our budget, we have a crisis going on. Are we ensuring, right, with the data that we have, that we are investing our dollars in the most so that everyone can prosper and thrive? And are these policymakers getting the decision knowing that this is the best investment at this time? So I don't want to, I know there's a lot to go into, and it's something really I'm passionate about as well. But I think it can be incredibly powerful in all facets and it really starts from, right, that community input of how we tell our story with community, and then how do we empower our elected officials to make decisions so that, right, we make impact in the communities we're especially looking for.
Thank you for that, because I really feel the importance of continuing to highlight even the intersectionality of community engagement, data, how the data is translated or visually presented, and then how decision makers can actually use that information to make informed decisions, and that it be grounded in truth and truth with community. John, I'm going to come back to you. You know, the racial disparities and, around a variety of indicators is very extensive. And whether you're looking at qualitative or quantitative data around those indicators, sometimes it can get lost in translation among diverse audiences and community. Can you talk a little bit about anecdotal data and storytelling and interviews, and how that could be part of data visualization?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot in here, and I just want to show two slides very quickly. So I'm pretty sure that Sophia's gonna be very happy because I've got a map. That was my whole goal, was just to make Sophia happy. I'm sure most folks on this meeting are familiar with these maps. These are called redlining maps. This is a redlining map of Chicago. The redlining maps were created in the 1930s and 1940s by a federal government agency called the Homeowners Loan Corporation, so it's known as the HOLC. And the HOLC's job during that period was to assess mortgage risk in major metropolitan areas around the country. And so a map received a blue or green color if it was deemed to be of high value or of low mortgage risk. So, right, so banks were encouraged to lend or to loan to these neighborhoods. By contrast, red neighborhoods received a red color if there was a single Black or African-American person who lived in that neighborhood. And it really didn't matter what the quality of the housing stock was, or the median income or the unemployment rate. As long as there was a single Black or African-American person that lived in that neighborhood, it received that red color to sort of discourage banks from lending in those neighborhoods. And so I think as I describe it, you think about what the map is showing, you can identify that this is an explicitly racist map. But the issue is I don't think many people sort of see that right away, right? Because as Sophia mentioned, maps are very powerful. People love maps. Oops. Yeah, I did. People love maps. We can see ourselves in maps, but they do have these potential for impacts. And so as an example, these redlining maps have had a long and enduring impact on American society. I mean, almost a century now, we have lived with the impacts of these maps on segregation and urban renewal, on urban development, on wealth inequality, on income inequality, on climate, even on access to low cost and high speed broadband internet. So I'm just going to ask Dylan to move to the next slide because I want to show you a quote that was written by the Hulk around this map. So we just move, there we go. So this is a sentence the Hulk wrote about this map in 1940. They wrote, this neighborhood is graded D. So this is referring to the red line neighborhoods. The neighborhood is rated D because of its concentration of Negroes, but the section may improve to a third class area as this element is forced out. And I think we can all agree that this is an explicitly racist statement. And I think that is the challenge when it comes to data visualizations that are solely and only quantitative. We often miss some of the stories, as you mentioned, Larissa, some of the stories, some of the experiences that people and communities have. And so one of the things that we can do as effective data communicators is to, as Sophia already mentioned, and Andrea as well, is to go out and talk to people, right? To talk to communities and work with them to better understand their experiences. And as, again, someone who's come from a quantitative economics math background, this is a hard thing for me and my colleagues to do. We are too accustomed, in my opinion, and comfortable maybe sitting behind a computer, downloading some data, writing some code, making some maps in ArcGIS and other tools. Sorry, Sophia, there are other mapping tools. We are too comfortable with that. And what I think needs to happen is quantitative folks need to have more qualitative training. Every person I know who's primarily a qualitative researcher or scientist has had some quantitative training. But the opposite, I don't think, can be said for quantitative researchers. So I've done, I lead a project at the Urban Institute called the Do No Harm Project, which we've written several reports on how to take this more equitable approach to data and data visualization. And across the various reports, I've probably interviewed like 150 people. And especially when when I ask people about this challenge of, well, how do you go out and talk to people? Where do you find them? What do you ask them? How do you have these conversations? The data journalists in particular are always like, well, you just talk to them. What's the big deal? You just talk to them. Not a problem. And my first reaction is like, okay, but where are they? How like, do you just call? Is there a bar that I'm supposed to go to just talk to people about maps? And really where it comes down to is a lot of the work that folks on this call are doing, which is to be involved in your community, to be at the library, to volunteer at a food pantry. It does not have to be necessarily to get started. In-depth, sophisticated, qualitative methods work. It can be as simple as understanding the people in and around your community, and then connecting with other organizations, advocacy groups, CBOs that do this kind of work. And that's how we end up getting to a place where we can combine the quantitative work, which can help us get a statistical understanding of the data, with the qualitative work that can help us better understand individual people's and communities' experiences with data, with public policy, with air quality, with maps, whatever it may be, to better understand their experiences. And that's how we can enrich the data and make it personal so that people, again, don't just see themselves on a map in an abstract form, but see themselves and their experiences in the visualization itself.
Thank you so much for that, John. As a trained qualitative researcher, there's nothing more beautiful than actually spending time in community and people watching, and how much data you can actually get and gather by just being in space with community.
Mhm.
Speaking of being in space with community, I'm going to actually pivot to Andrea and to talk really about the role of government in community. There's such often a disconnect, and I believe you have a couple slides as well that you would like to share. How can data visualization contribute to greater transparency in government and increase collaborative efforts between government and community to address racial inequities?
Thank you for the question. And I don't have a great map, or anything fun as much as John. So just some words, but it is accessible. So there you go, modeling. I love John's point as well, speaking to about knowing your strength and not, right? Like quantitative researchers typically, it is really hard to go out to community in meaningful collect engagement, right? To this question specifically about how government can work in data visualization, especially what is being shown on this slide right now is that recently in May 2024, so just a few months ago, the mayor and city council had unanimously adopted a racial and social equity ordinance, right? An equity values and standards policy that was actually from a measure that was passed through our voters. So our voters had passed, wanting an equity kind of amendment into our charter. And so with that, our mayor and city council codified this equity policy and ordinance. And so what this does is that it tells boards and commissions, elected officials, and the administration a set of values, standards, and accountability of how we should all be working in order to advance the work. And this is incredibly important, right? It codifies how we move equity in our work. In a time where things are really shaky, right? This is now in our charter where community can one hold the city accountable and vice versa, right? Elected officials and an administration, we can work together to say, hey, we have this in our charter, we can use this, to ensure that we are uplifting all of our communities, especially those that have been left behind. And one of those tenets, right, is that we're anchored in disaggregated data. And we know that disaggregated data, right, showing, demonstrating, and kind of what the essence of what we're saying, right, doing that in community, highlighting in a way, in a strength-based way, and doing that community engagement. And one of the direct ways of how we're doing that and aliving this equity policy and ordinance is that recently the city of San Jose on our website, it's also a plug on the Office of Racial and Social Equity's website, published all of our department equity action plans. So all of the city departments, right, about 19 departments in the city of San Jose under the city manager's purview are required to create an equity action plan. So this is our second iteration of the equity action plan, but what's really cool here is that we publish them online. And then also another plug for digital accessibility is, again, doing it in an ergonomic fashion where it can be read through mobile, it can be read through screen, right, in up-down fashion. We did it in a table format because I'm not sure if you all are aware, but PDFs can be incredibly limiting, right, on screen readers. And so we did it in a way where we're incredibly intentional about how we even displayed these equity action plans, right? Really aliving how we anchor ourselves in data. And the visualization part of it is we then paired it with a dashboard. So we said, okay, here are all the plans, and these are actually how the departments are working on in the progress of these equity action plans. So you can scroll through the library department, you can see the parks department, and you can see, right, there's 13 actions that are in progress. There are 10 that haven't been worked on, and there are 5 that are completed. And we update that on a quarterly basis. So it really creates the accountability for our community so that they can see, okay, look, our this is the police department's action plan. I see that here. And then now it's being displayed. Okay, and if I have any questions, I have a contact. And this is the direct way, again, of how we're aliving this policy and our value, right? One of the values of anchoring in data, and then also being accessible to the public. And with that all being said, right, it's kind of going back to my original point of that ultimately we are in the administration and we work hand in hand with our elected officials so that they can make these policies, right, these decisions. And it's really important that, one, they have the information to make these important decisions, but that also that our community have access to these data, to this information from that advocacy lens as well, so that we can also work hand in hand.
Thank you for that. And I think it's really important to kind of see, again, the intersection of policy, how data comes together, how do you create the opportunity for evaluation or just ongoing engagement and accessibility where we're actually like living our values of what we believe in as an institution or as a government and how you structure that. And it's really beautiful. The story is very beautiful for the city of San Jose. So thank you for sharing. Sophie, I'm going to come back to you now. And, I'd love to go into community engagement and developing community engagement toolkits. So how do we, when we think about how to poll attendees and aggregate data across a lot of different places and spaces to get better insights on themes and trends, particularly within California, how can visualizations, and I'm already seeing a beautiful map right here of interconnectivity, but how can visuals be helpful in gathering and presenting that type of data, that aggregate data that is happening in a lot of different places?
Absolutely. And yeah, this is, thank you again, Dylan, for your work. This is just a quick map of all of the departments that utilize Esri software, which means all these departments have wonderful GIS staff. So I'm a big proponent of public servants. I think, again, we kind of think about or don't even think about all the work that maps are being made across city and state and local government. I also just want to uplift and agree with some of the things that my fellow panelists said. One, what John said about how quantitative data is really not being incorporated as much, or community storytelling isn't being incorporated as much. And I just want to uplift that while GIS has been an industry and a career for about 60 to 70 years, the incorporation of equity and community engagement into a GIS person's work really hasn't been as uplifted, maybe about 10 years. So our industry as a whole is about 10 years old. And so there is still a lot of learning, but I also want to say that kind of informing and having a community engagement be a part of curriculum is still something that is new. Not to say that, it's okay that people are not doing it, but just to preface that. And then also with what Andrea was saying about the importance of codifying equity into a city, county, state plan, which really allows for staff, budget, time, and allocation to be able to do this work. For community engagement, I'm going to uplift a couple of examples again, and these examples, we can go to the next slide, and they'll be the couple that I'll be talking about. But I think before I get there, I just want to talk about one of my first GIS projects that I engaged in as a college student. I went to Wellesley College on the East Coast, an all-women's college, and my first map that I created was I went door to door and knocked on strangers' doors to ask them where they went grocery shopping. And where I went to school was a pretty affluent area, but I really wanted to engage with community members. And there were 3 conversations that really stood out to me. I knocked on 50 doors, talked to 17 people, but 3 people allowed me into their home. One of them was a young gentleman who was the only one that biked to the local grocery store. Another one was an elderly gentleman who relied on his family to have deliver food. But the third one was a young mother who was on WIC, who had 2 young kids. She welcomed me into her home, which was incredible, and just told me that the difficulty of her being able to get her food, not only the pricing with the store being so close to her, but also the culturally appropriate food. And that was when I think mapping, community engagement, and GIS really came together for me. It was my big aha moment that said all of these things are interconnected. And again, if I just mapped out the residents' responses, I wouldn't have gotten that intersection of transportation needs, of cultural needs, of pricing, of food. And so that was really over 10 years ago, there weren't any jobs too that had community engagement or equity in the title. And so again, we've been so far. But moving on to my examples, I want to uplift one, the city of Tacoma. So they are a really wonderful jurisdiction in the state of Washington. They have a 10-year citywide equity action plan. And right now they have codified that every single policy that comes to the city council, they have to look at the equity index. And they have an equity index that has about 32 indicators broken up into 5 categories: accessibility, livability, education, economy, and environmental health. So every single department has to utilize this equity index as well with the work that they're doing. When they started creating this equity index about 5 years ago, one of the questions that came to mind, because the chief equity officer was going through every department saying, how can you incorporate equity into the work that you're doing? One came to mind was that the public works department. And they specifically talked about how the residents would call in or talk to someone in the public works department to get their pothole filled on their street. And they said, well, disproportionately, we're fixing potholes in a more affluent area. And the equity officer said, well, let's map out the calls. Let's map out where these residents lived. And they found that most of the calls were concentrated in a specific area. And so they asked, the public works department asked, well, why aren't other people calling? And they learned that people either don't know the number to call, don't have time to call, don't feel comfortable talking to someone on the phone. And so what they did instead was created a survey and really said that, no, it should be the onus of that department to equitably redistribute these resources. Because at the end of the day, city, county, state, local government services, it's all about how are you distributing community resources equitably at the baseline. And I've heard that from a number of equity officers. Another example with the city of Tacoma is their fire department. So you might ask, how can a fire department distribute their resources equitably? They mapped out where residents who had heart attacks on the streets were and who had life-saving CPR versus those who didn't. They mapped that out and they realized that in a specific area concentrated in the city, there were folks who didn't know how to perform CPR. And so they decided to do training classes for that specific neighborhood to perform life-saving CPR. And I think these are just, again, ways that have been integrated into specific departments. I'll move over to the city of Tucson. So the city of Tucson has a 4-step equity action plan. It's called the Tucson Equity Data Strategy. And one of their pillars is solely on community engagement. What they, at the city level and at the department level of their equity department, is they said the equity department and office should be the ones that have a comprehensive community engagement strategy. And so they have it from just asking about 10 questions all the way to about a 30 question questionnaire. They have it in English and Spanish because Spanish is another predominant language in that area. They have it in a Word document and Survey 123, and then in Excel form. And so they did this specifically at the equity officer level, saying that if there's a department that maybe isn't as familiar with community engagement, here's a great starting point. Another piece from that city specifically is that equity officer, Larisse Walker, said that she also wanted to be mindful that when you're doing community engagement, it's not necessarily extractive and they're not going back to the same people over and over, but that as different departments, you're really working together to make sure that you're not just like polling the same people. The last one that I'll talk about is LA County over there with D'Artagnan Scorza and his incredible team. One of their community engagement projects that they worked on was the State of Black Los Angeles report. They actually have an updated version of that report coming out this year in 2025. And so they did a comprehensive look, not only with county staff, but with community organizers, community leaders in the county to really have let's look at what is the state of Black residents specifically in our county to show what are the disproportionate disparities that exist in this area. And so again, these are just examples and they're all different. And one isn't necessarily better than the other, but it's what worked for their jurisdiction and with their community and their staff, and just also incorporated that really high importance of storytelling and that narrative. And we'll just share the other slide because I'm not sure how much time we all have. But the last slide that I have are just some resources that are available for the public and the commission. I specifically want to highlight the one on the right. It's our inaugural Equity and Social Justice Map booklet. The commissioners, all of you guys will be receiving this. We're sending them to Larissa's office in Sacramento, so you'll have printed copies, but the public can also request these as well. But the reason why I'm so excited about this is it's 58 customer examples from mostly across the US, but in 13 different industries. They're all customers that have done work in equity and social justice. And I think this helps uplift that this is not just work that people are doing, not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's also good for business. It's also good for your community, and it allows for our resources to be spread in a manner that is accessible and to everyone. So again, these are just resources that we have, but I'll end it there. And again, thank you for the question.
Thank you, Sophie. And if we could pull down the slides and come to a group together, I really appreciate really just this dialogue and the conversation around creating almost a learning environment. How do we learn more about the communities that we are serving, and how do we make adjustments to make sure those that need the resources the most actually get those resources and that all can actually benefit. And that's really about what this work is making sure there's opportunity and that all can benefit. We are winding down our conversation today because we do want to make sure the commissioners have the opportunity to ask questions and be in dialogue amongst themselves about the things that they've learned and give staff a little bit around priorities. So I'm going to end with one question around key takeaways, and I'm actually going to start with Andrea. And this is the same question for all. What are your 2 key takeaways on data visualization as a tool for advancing racial equity? And what does the commission and the data committee really need to know about data visualization?
Thank you for that. I would say it's really important that the ability to codify something in our charter has been incredibly important, right? And allowing standards, values, and how we go about that, right? Like I said, anchoring in data is really important. In disaggregated data, excuse me, is very important. And to that same essence, right, of codifying is also community engagement, which is very much a part of that policy and ordinance. And as I mentioned, and I have said kind of in a few times, is that coordination, that engagement with community of how data and how that story is told as well is incredibly important. So how codify, having that equity kind of component, having that strength of a city to ensure that equity is a value of ours. We plan on doing this. We're anchored in data, and that also community engagement is incredibly important in how we root ourselves in data are the kind of 2 key takeaways from a city perspective, and kind of how powerful data visualization can be used.
Thank you. Sophia, how about you?
Yes, I definitely agree with Andreas. I'll uplift 2 other ones. I think and I've said this and I'll just say it again, I think connecting with your incredible GIS staff that you have at the state level and other departments. There are folks that have worked on specific equity indicators or maps from their specific department. And I think just going along with that is to document your decision making specifically on what indicators you chose and why. I've always been always approach this work in that way, knowing that there could be questions, there could be folks asking, why did you have this specific resource here? Or why did you choose this? Just having documentation and understanding about why you chose that indicator for your map. So I would do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. And John, to wrap us up before we transition to commission questions and dialogue, what are your 2 key takeaways on data visualization?
Yeah, I'm not sure I could fit everything into two, but I'll focus on sort of the group organizational team dynamic, since we
Mm.
haven't really talked about that so much. So I'd say two things on sort of taking an equity approach to data viz or data in an organization. So the first one is there's an entire data ecosystem here, right? From data collection to data analysis to data
Mhm.
visualization, and recognizing that equity is important in each of those pieces. You know, if you are at an organization that is collecting data, you know, how are you going to go about not just asking the questions, right? That's sort of Sophia and Andrew have already sort of talked about, like what are
Yeah.
equitable ways to actually ask the questions, different languages, for example, different means that people can respond. But, you know, how are you going to, for example, as I mentioned earlier, order the results in the survey or
Mhm.
in the data set? And then all the way to the dissemination, the communication side. And then the second part I would say about within this sort of organizational or team structure is the importance or the value that the data visualization team often has in this process. So in lots of organizations that I work with, the data viz editorial, you know, there's a communications team, right? And they often, for better or for worse, are sort of the gatekeeper into what is going to go out the door. And because that often happens, that team then has an opportunity to not just be a gatekeeper on, you know, is this following our standards when it comes to, you know, editorial quality or when it
Yeah.
comes to, you know, length or language or whatever it is, but has the ability to be that gatekeeper and to say, you know, this bar chart is ordered in this particular way. Maybe we could make it better. Maybe we are using words or phrases in and around our maps or our graphs that we would want to change and approach in a sort of more equitable way. So the phrase gatekeeper is often used with a negative connotation, but I think here we can reframe it to think about how if we, I mean, everybody should in an organization, but in particular, if the communications team could have this equitable, inclusive framework front of mind, they can be the check on the products that are coming out. And I'll just finish with one quick story. Several years ago, we at Urban decided to be much more conscious and purposeful about how we would handle our alternative text and the images that we put online. So for
Mhm.
folks who don't know, um, you could attach alternative or alt text to your images so that someone who's a low vision reader or a blind reader, when they are using a screen reader that literally reads the website to them, when it gets to an image, there's actually some text attached to it. So it actually describes what's going in the graph. And we had long discussions about who should be responsible for writing that text. Should it be the researcher, who's the content creator, or should it be the editor who's responsible, ultimately going to edit the entire piece and ultimately sort of responsible for when and how it gets put onto the website? And we decided at the end to require our researchers to write the alt text. And we did that for two reasons. One, they're the content experts, so they should be responsible for writing alt text. And if they could write good alt text, then they could write a good title for their chart. And secondly, the fact that you require a researcher to do that makes them aware that this is something that needs to happen. And that awareness just within the process has its own value. So within that sort of organizational structure, I think there are ways that we can embed and sort of embed and disperse this equitable framework to data and to data visualization.
Thank you so much, John, and please join me in thanking our speakers for a very informative discussion around data visualization and how it can be used as a tool for advancing racial equity. Commissioner Matthews, I'm going to turn it really to you and Commissioner Richardson if you have any questions, but for you all to have the space to have ask questions or have dialogue around the content that was shared here this afternoon.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you again to our distinguished panelists for that very insightful conversation. I was writing copious notes, and I'm sure Commissioner Richardson was as well. Um, we'll discuss our thoughts publicly in a moment, but did want to first just open it up to see if Commissioner Richardson had any questions for the panelists.
I didn't have any questions, but I do want to punctuate something that I think they all said, and John especially. And I really appreciated this idea of intersectionality. It's really easy to stay focused on data and what your maps look like and it's a bar graph and the colors. But I really valued the conversation around community and equity. And something that probably seems little, but is a really big deal is website accessibility. Hadn't even thought about it, took a lot of notes around different users will use that. And in many ways, the data that will be shared will be through a website. And so understanding that whether it's a temporary or permanent disability, we want all people to have access. And I really appreciated that focus and conversation, and think later we'll have an opportunity to talk about how do we make that, punctuate that in a toolbox, but really wanted to thank the panel for bringing that to life.
Well, thank you so much. And likewise, I don't have any deep probing questions to follow up with. I think you all covered so much, but I did want to also just express my thanks for the very salient examples that you used. I was just thinking about the one you used for community engagement, Sophia. Just very powerful because, I think it's just a great example of if you don't disaggregate the data and in a qualitative manner, there's just no way you get some of that intersectionality. There's no way you get to the root causes and the real stories that share so much. And so each of you shared incredible examples and very poignant stories. And so just wanted to say thank you again for such a great presentation. I know we have a break coming up very soon, but we will now take any public comments related to this agenda item. Data visuals used as a tool to advance racial equity. Do we have any public comments?
We'll give it a minute to see if anyone trickles in. And in that time, I just want to give a reminder that you can submit a virtual public comment card by visiting racialequity.lci.ca.gov/meetings and completing the public comment form that it will be linked there. Members of the public joining from our viewing room today can also complete this form at the staff table in the viewing room. You will also need to submit a public comment card for each item that you wish to speak on. At this time, there's no comment, so giving it back to you, Chair Matthews.
All right, thank you so much, Atia. All right, at this time, I think we've earned it. We will take a 10-minute recess. And so why don't we reconvene at 4:17 and we will finish the rest of, Commissioner Richardson, I see you have a question. Oh, okay, not.
Commissioner Matthews, I just wanted to clarify, we have a slide up that says recess for 15 minutes. So are we back at 10 or 15?
My apologies there. Why don't we take a 15-minute recess? Does that work?
Yes.
And we'll come back at, if I'm doing my math correctly, 4:23. So we'll see you all there.
Thank you. All right, I do want to acknowledge that we do have both of our commissioners, and we'll give it one more minute just so the public can come back as well. Commissioner Mathers, if you want to reconvene us.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. We will reconvene. Thank you so much for the break. I call this meeting back to order at 4:23 p.m. We will now move into agenda item number 7, which will be a discussion facilitated by Joyce Chow, our facilitator from Abundance. Joyce will guide us through discussion on key activities from recent meetings, what we've heard, and what we want to explore further as a committee to continue moving towards the creation of the Commission's racial equity framework. Before I pass it to Joyce, did just want to reiterate to the public, we have slides that will be shared, that can be shared. And so no need to, you don't have to take copious notes. We'll get everything out to you. Those will be available for the public as well. But Joyce, I will pass it over to you for this next segment.
Great, thank you so much, Commissioner Matthews. Can you all hear me okay? Just doing a quick check. Great. All right, so we will go ahead and jump into the conversation. And based on how this morning went, it was quite robust. So I want to leave as much time as possible for both you, Commissioner Matthews, and you, Commissioner Richardson, to be able to discuss. But I want to start with a quick contextualization of this conversation at this point in time. So as you both know, our framework is, the draft racial equity framework is due December 1st. And to get there, the initial draft of the framework will be coming out this June. So to get there, right, the commission needs a couple of opportunities to work with recommendations from committees. And that's really the grounding thing I want us to go into this conversation with today. Today's conversation is to start to identify those concrete, methodologies and tools as it relates to data. It should say data strategies to recommend to the commission. So if we could go to the next slide. And this conversation is really designed to build off of the December commission meeting, right? So in December, we did the discussion activity where we had sticky notes. Commissioners added their thoughts under different categories, one of which was data, and that's what the one that we've pulled out here. And then members of the public in attendance were also able to share their thoughts as well through some dot sticker voting activities that we did. So this slide is just to refresh us on, what this was, what we saw. Coming out of that activity, there were just a few themes that I'll name here just to get some thoughts flowing. I'm sure there's more that's coming up in your minds based on today's conversation and just other, other activities and other ongoing engagements that you've been thinking about. But the first is, data disaggregation was huge across these responses, right? It comes up in multiple places, not just in any single one response. It really lives throughout a lot of these. And then the second, as I was looking at these responses, I think another prevalent theme here is data as an instrument for accountability, right? Data can promote transparency, data can drive towards that accountability. And so to build on that, today's focus is to think about, what are the 3 to 5 data methodologies and tools that fit these criteria, right? 1, is it actionable? Can it be implemented? 2, is it urgent? What needs to happen now? And one thing I'll say about that is even if it's not urgent now, it doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't consider it, but maybe that's one of the just one of the guiding parameters for us, right? And then the third is structural. Does it foster sustainable internal shifts towards equity? So can it be something that's embedded into organizational structures and maybe can be sustained over time, as opposed to something that maybe is more of a one-off effort? And these parameters really come out of thinking about the commission's charge, right? Thinking about the methodologies and tools that committees are recommending to commissions to eventually put into the framework. So that's our goal for this discussion today. 3 to 5 concrete, as much as possible, actionable, urgent, structural data methodologies and tools. And then if there's certain areas that you feel like I still don't have enough information, that's okay too. We want to identify those additional research areas for staff to conduct between now and April. Depending on how the conversation goes today, we may put it up to a vote. I think I'll defer to the committee on this, as well as Dr. Estes and Doug from our legal counsel on how we want to do that. But I think the point of this conversation is to make sure that staff have a little bit more direction coming out of this conversation to be able to bring forward into preparing for the March commission meetings. Dr. Estes, I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Joyce. Just real quickly, given that a third member of the committee is not here, Dr. Manuel Pastor, who also serves as the lead for this committee, I would advise on not voting until we can get his feedback. And that's something that hopefully he'll be able to pop in. But if not, we will work offline with him and bring that forward to the full body as part of the data committee report to be provided at that March meeting. So more to come, but we want to make sure that we capture what Dr. Pastor has to add.
Great, thank you for that, Dr. Estes. And I saw some nodding heads from both Commissioner Matthews and Richardson, so it sounds like we are in agreement there. So in that case, we can make today more of that exploratory conversation. I think we still want to work towards something concrete as much as possible, but recognizing that there will be more to come. And again, really thinking about this conversation as like guidance and direction for staff to support March meeting planning. So with that, there were some activities we had planned for today, but based on how this morning's conversation went with the Budget Equity Committee, like folks were ready to go and really had ideas like off the top of their mind right away. I'll kind of open it up to both of you to see how you want to engage in this conversation. If there's something that's already pressing, we can just dive right into it. If we want more structure, we can switch over to the activities. But Commissioner Richardson, Commissioner Matthews, any initial thoughts on these 3 to 5 methodologies and tools? Yes, Commissioner Richardson.
Just to repeat myself from earlier, is just the emphasis that I thought the panel made on the accessibility of the data. I think we have a lot of ideas about categorization, how the data should be aggregated or disaggregated, or the usage of it, but I really appreciated having something around the focus on accessibility and thinking about the different users who will need to do that, and having that, whether it's a part of our underlying methodology or a tool on how the data should be displayed. I think that was, I would really want to punctuate that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Commissioner Matthews, any thoughts there?
No, I agree with that 100%. It sounds like, based on Commissioner Richardson just jumping right in, we're just going to talk about it. So I don't think we need to necessarily do a lot of brainstorming. The other thing I wanted to mention is I did have an opportunity to connect with Dr. Pastor about just some of his thoughts. And since we're not necessarily voting on anything, he had a lot of ideas and thoughts that I thought I should bring forward today, just to share. So at least the team is thinking about what to potentially include. And we did hear quite a bit about it in the earlier presentation as well. But the first thing I wanted to just uplift is on the sustainability piece. Is something that is actionable. And I feel that it's urgent just from the perspective that it's a requirement, it's a deliverable for this year, but moving forward, I think it would also be just as important. And that's some sort of annual equity report. That's data. And hopefully it's data that the entire state can react to, and then also like local municipalities. So right now I tend to get a lot of data on, DEI, equity, et cetera, from like McKinsey and so forth. And that's because really no states or municipalities tend to do a great job at some sort of regular ongoing report. I think this body, this entity is perfect for that. And there could be partnership with state agencies and departments, but I think that needs to be something that is baked into the plan. Dr. Estes, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, one thing to consider is our executive order actually does require some sort of annual report, which is great. I think
Perfect.
clear, and it doesn't have to, not today, but a little bit clearer articulation as to what should go in that report. We could pick thousands of indicators, but it's really getting us to narrow down. And, there may be other examples from other states or local jurisdictions that have already selected strong indicators for us to pull, and then us understanding from a commission perspective, how do we want to structure it? Do we want it to be 2-page or front and back items that kind of go out, or do we want like an actual hard copy book report? So just things to think about, and again, not refined for today, but really that's the kind of guidance we need, because we want to make sure that when we are developing out the framework and recommendations that are within that framework, that we are really clear about what it is and how it will impact this work moving forward.
Absolutely. Commissioner Richardson.
I'm never one to shy away from piggybacking on a great idea. So Dr. Estes talked about the report. I just say two things to think about is, one, who is the audience of such thing? Is it the department? Is it a public audience? So whenever we have that discussion, we should think about who's the audience. And something I got from the panelists was a posting of it to ensure that the actual report gets done. I think I really appreciated the idea that people would have to be responsible for posting what their plan or their report is, and making that accessible to more than just themselves. So two things to consider.
I would agree. And I think that actually, when you talk about the posting of it, that goes to another recommendation. One of the things that Dr. Pastor mentioned, I was thinking about as well, is just how are we going to measure and make sure that the tracking of outcomes, all of this disaggregated data, I think I saw somewhere, I can't remember who shared it, but longitudinal studies, outcomes, how are those things going to be made transparent? And so I think that, if folks are required to post, that helps with some of that. And then as part of, what are we hoping to include? One of the things that I know I had thought about and Dr. Pastor mentioned as well is specifically when it comes to investments, like geographically speaking, how can we make that data transparent by geographical region, area, broken down? Let's just see where the money is going. And I think that is going to be that's got to be a critical element of the report, and something that is also apparently just super transparent, crystal clear. Something else to share. Again, I'm just throwing ideas out, so please feel free to react or ask questions. We did talk about the disaggregation of data. So one conversation that Dr. Pastor and I did have was geographically speaking, and then of course via special populations. I know we would need to narrow that down, But he did also recommend Esri specifically, and based on the slide that Sophia shared, and all of the state departments that are already partnering with Esri and have GIS specialists, I think that's what she mentioned. Um, I would agree. I think that's a great kind of starting point, that's sustainable, because of the partnerships that are already there. And so, how do we leverage the relationship with Esri, to disaggregate the data effectively with geographical populations, or by geography and also by special populations? And then something else that he mentioned, this is probably not quite as urgent, and I'm not even sure how we would necessarily roll this out. You would have to do it on a phased or limited basis. But he said we should leverage universities, somehow, with how we are disaggregating the data. And so obviously he founded a whole school for this. I'm sure we could start there, and there are, I'm sure, other universities that do this type of disaggregation and coaching and support. But I like the concept. Like I said, I think it would just take some time to probably phase that out. Commissioner Richardson.
So a couple of things. One, totally agree with the idea of investments. I think that could be a great inclusion on any report or public data with regard to how investments are being made. I think that holds people accountable. And then based on the data aggregation, we can remind ourselves, all of us, about AB 1726 and the Asian and Pacific Islander data disaggregation. I think we can look for models even within our own borders of California on how to go about doing that and get some ideas. But definitely wanted to comment on those two things you brought up.
I love it. All right, and then the last thing, idea that Dr. Pastor shared, and I just wanted to make sure I don't forget it, and I added some components to it as well. But he just said trainings. we got to talk about training. And I was like, all right, yeah, for sure. What do those trainings need to look like? And so, as I was listening to the panelists, I wrote down some different things. So, for one, as John was speaking, I was thinking, a lot of folks do get training on quantitative data analysis. I think a lot fewer have trainings on qualitative data analysis, the importance of it. And so there's probably something there in terms of a potential gap. I love the strengths-based component and concept of, multiple panelists speaking to that piece. And again, I think this is where we can talk about, once we've identified an audience and we want to give simple visualizations and all of that. Yeah, great. It's easy to say. It's a lot harder to do. And so probably having some sort of trainings available for state agencies or people that say, we want to get better at this. And how do we do that? So whether it's through some sort of partnerships or, a selected entity, just making sure that we have some sort of standardization behind, okay, when we say simple visuals, this is what we're talking about. And you might have some choices or options, but we're giving some good guidance on that piece. And then also on the language. So I know from experience, and John also spoke to this, that is the secret sauce often to effective communication, but it's also very difficult to do. So even if it's the comms folks, or say we do want to require, quote unquote, the researchers, the data geeks, to figure out a way to distill what they're saying into alt text. I think that's what he used. There probably has to be training around that. And so making sure that whatever we're asking folks to do, we're thinking about what sort of technical assistance or training might be required to help them do it effectively. And I think that should be baked in from the beginning. I've been talking a lot, so I don't know whose hand was up first, Dr. Estes or Commissioner Richardson. Okay, Dr.
I can defer to Commissioner Richardson.
No need. You go, Dr.
Okay.
Estes.
I mean, the beauty of having an implementation and technical assistance committee that's already been established, and hopefully we can convene a meeting later this spring and sometime next fall to be part of that conversation of what does training look like? What are the type of things that need to be covered in the training? Currently as our staffing sides, we are not necessarily positioned to develop a curriculum and implement that curriculum, but are there elements that need to be included within that? Because technical assistance is one of our requirements as a commission within the executive order, and which has been codified within state legislation. My only other comment, and going back to accessibility and language, and even how do researchers or practitioners write alternative language, connects into some of the conversation that we had at our community engagement committee meeting around plain and simple language and the importance of making sure that, whether it's using visuals and having that plain and simple language be part of that, but we really have to continue to bring, and weave that tapestry of all the different elements that really do need to go together in developing out this framework. And that's just another piece. Like, how are we talking about this? And ensuring that folks are able to understand, how do you talk to your grandmother about what you're trying to share in this diagram, and like get it to that. And if you don't think your grandmother would understand it, then you got to reground yourself and figure out how to start over. But really pushing folks to just be okay with making mistakes, be okay with learning from those mistakes. But these are all just steps that we can take. And I think what's beautiful about what's going on in the city of San Jose is that they are kind of moving this in a way where they're living their values around advancing equity work in a lot of different ways. And this is an opportunity that the state of California does have in having this framework and getting elements of it adopted.
Commissioner Richardson.
I don't know if this is a question or we need to put a pin in this or put this on a parking lot, but perhaps the technical and implementation committee is responsible. But it seems to me that if we're going to put in requirements or things like tracking or outcomes that we're expecting, at some point we need to talk about oversight and how do we make sure that the things that we're doing, is that the responsibility of this committee? Is that going to be ongoing? And it comes up every time, but I just wanted to say it. We don't want to lose sight of, if we're going to have requirements, someone needs to make sure that those requirements are being met, and whose responsibility is that? And we need to have that discussion, either part of our recommendation as the commission or that committee. But I defer to Dr. Estes on leading us through who's the right place or where's the right place to have that discussion and recommendation.
Yeah, I would say probably the full commission meeting is the right place. And I think some of that has already come up in conversation at your full commission meeting in December around what are some of the priorities. So I do think you've already started to tease in that. And I think, again, bringing that up as a full body and having conversations of, this is something that we do want to move forward, and figuring out, how do we write it in a way that is actionable, and what is the step 1, step 2 to get you to what would look like some sort of accountability or responsible entity to ensure things are happening.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I just had one last idea that I wrote down while we were listening to the panelists as well. It was connected to a final recommendation that Dr. Pastor kind of mentioned. He has some tactical components on the concept of data sharing. So he said, it's probably not super urgent, but we should be looking at the California Policy Lab, UC Institution, and even EDD and the Department of Labor in terms of how they share relevant, up-to-date data relatively effectively. He said it's not perfect, but it's almost kind of in the moment. And the one thing that I've been thinking about kind of from the beginning of this whole thing is, on the data sharing piece at least, is I love that ordinance that the city of San Jose had, because it was a commitment to specify stated values. And in my experience, and several others have shared in different subcommittee meetings and some of the broader ones, and in community engagement subcommittee meetings as well, a lot of times it's a choice. So state agencies and departments, I would love to see, even if it's going to take some time to get there technically, just a commitment to sharing that data. And so choosing it as a value. And maybe there's a broader ordinance that we could recommend around this whole data piece, but on that piece, I would just love to see folks actually state on paper, our agency, our entity is committed to sharing data with other state agencies, with the public, with local municipalities, so that they can be held accountable in that space. Right now, I just see too much blocking and sadly fighting when it comes to data sharing. And so just put it on paper, and then we can build out what it can look like down the road in terms of the cost, because a lot of times that ends up being what happens. But I love to see something like that ordinance with every single state agency. It's like, yeah, we're gonna share data, DHCS and public health, or whoever the two might be. That would be wonderful.
Commissioner Matthews, you may be aware of this because of the field that we work in, but right now, the state has tried with HIE to be more involved and demonstrative with data sharing in healthcare. Yeah. And again, to your point, so eloquently said about barriers, right? So the lawyers come in and say can't do it for all kinds of reasons and not thinking about the greater good. Perhaps it might be helpful for us in our quest to have data sharing tap into some of the other efforts that are going on. They may have made strides or can share information on how we can make sure that that happens, because I know it's been a lot of hard work. That continues to be a challenge, but maybe the combined power of all of our efforts can make some headway.
No, I agree 100%. And so again, I'm thinking about that graphic that Sophia shared, and I saw a lot of healthcare agencies all in one little circle. And then I think I saw some education in another circle, and then natural resources in another circle. And so I was just thinking from my day-to-day role, man, how powerful would it be if like education and healthcare shared data as sectors? If DHCS and the California Department of Education were sharing data, and I know again there are rules and laws, there's HIPAA and FERPA and all of these different things, but sometimes we waste way too much time and too much money through our ignorance. And so I'm just thinking about like vaccines. We know our kids we know where to find them, but we don't always have that data, access to that data on the education side and with universities and so forth. So if state agencies could find a way to navigate, I love the lawyers and their protections. If we could have some folks who are thinking about how to get around some of those things so we could do this good work, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I really appreciate this discussion, and what I'm excited about is hearing these different threads over the course of the last year plus, but also just across different meetings and different settings really starting to come together. We have about 5 minutes or so left of this conversation, so I am going to attempt to do something potentially ambitious and try to summarize a lot of the great ideas that you all have shared. I want to try to pare back, like, is this accurate? Am I hearing these focus areas correctly? And then I also want to invite commissioners to explore, are there other areas that you want to tease out further, including areas for additional research? So some of the methodologies and tools that I'm hearing so far, in no particular order, but I think what I heard was accessibility of data in whatever form it's presented in. And that took on a few different strands in this conversation. It's data sharing, making it available. There's accessibility in terms of plain language, right? Making it understandable. And then alt text, just making sure that it is legible, readable, again, accessible for a wide variety of audiences. So accessibility of the data itself. The other thing that I heard, so that's number one. Number two, I think I also heard data disaggregation and really exploring across a couple of different areas there as well. We talked about geography, we talked about populations. In a second, I'll come back to maybe some areas of additional research around that, but that's number two. Number three, or maybe it's two 2A, 2B. I don't know how you all want to think about this, but as a potential offshoot for data disaggregation, I'm hearing something about partnerships as well, right? Who are the entities we can leverage to do that data disaggregation? Is it universities? Is it Esri? So something around the partnerships bucket is number 3. 4, annual equity report. And as I say this out loud, you know, I'm open to hearing if this is something that really should be bucketed again underneath some of the other pillars that we're talking about here. But making, you know, kind of exploring what does that look like for that data to be regularly shared, for example, make it accessible, right? So again, really connecting to some of those earlier ideas. And then lastly, trainings. So heard some things around like how do we build up more capacity, training as capacity building, right? So training for capacity building around qualitative data analysis, if that is useful for folks, because we know that oftentimes there's a heavy emphasis on quantitative, and qualitative is sort of a different element in and of itself. And then other areas of training I heard here were guidance on like data visualization and language and that accessibility piece. So I recognize that what I'm pulling out here are kind of interconnected themes, and I think that's sort of the form the conversation has taken on. And we can continue to tease those out, but I want to pause and see if that like reflects how you all have been thinking about these big buckets.
Absolutely, Joyce. Thank you. Great job on capturing all of that.
I do want to make sure too that we don't forget the usability, utility of the data. So we will have to we'll have to include that somewhere. I don't know which bucket it goes under. That's part of the implementation piece, but I think we'll want to have some guidance for folks around there. Thank you. But love everything else as well. Fantastic job.
Thank you, Commissioner Matthews and Commissioner Richardson, for the feedback. I think you teed up my next point perfectly. So the next area for additional research and or questions. Some of the things I heard here was around AB 1726 and, you know, potentially looking at other models of like where have we maybe even seen data disaggregation already happening within the state. And then that second piece that you just raised again, Commissioner Matthews, and that you raised originally, Commissioner Richardson, around like where does this live? Maybe that is a question to bring forward to the full commission, as Dr. Estes had suggested. So those are the 2 areas of, you know, additional research or exploration. Are there any others that you all would want to elevate at this time?
Okay. I can't anything else. Okay.
Okay. Well, then hearing none for now, I'll go ahead and wrap us up. You know, I'll turn it back over to you, Commissioner Matthews, so we can do, I think it's public comment, since we are not voting today, and then go from there. But thank you all.
All right. Thank you so much, Joyce. Fantastic job. And thanks for all of the great ideas, Commissioner Richardson. Very good conversation. Before we, well, we're not going to have a formal vote or motion. We won't need a motion to approve an initial set of data strategies until we've had an opportunity, as we discussed, to share this with Dr. Pastor as well, get his thoughts and affirmations, and then we'll move forward formally at a later time. But I did want to open it up to take any public comments related to this agenda item, because it is possible that we miss things as well. And so I want to hear from the public. For any members of the public who would like to share their thoughts in the committee discussion, we encourage you to use the public comment process as an opportunity for this dialogue. Natia, do we have any public comments?
At this time, we have no public comment, but we can give it a minute and wait to see if something trickles in. And just as a reminder, please feel free to submit a virtual public comment card by visiting racialequity.lci.ca.gov/meetings.
All right. Any public comments in the 30 seconds we've given.
No public comment so far.
Fantastic. All right, thanks, Satia. Again, today we won't be taking any sort of formal vote. And so we will move forward to agenda item number 8, which is next steps for staff action. Our discussion today covered a wide range of topics and ideas related to data strategies. We had good discussion. And so we'd like to engage commission staff on digging further into key areas that will support our future meetings and progress. So we identified several items and different themes that we will follow up on from today's discussion. Joyce did just share some of those. I just want to open it up to Commissioner Richardson. Would the committee like to propose any other next steps for staff in terms of action?
No, I appreciate it, and I agree with Dr. Estes about waiting for our other colleague in arms to vote on some of the things that came up today. Great discussion. Appreciate your leadership, Commissioner Matthews, and appreciate Joyce's summarization. And I think we have some action items based on Dr. Estes' advice and counsel to bring some things to the fuller commission. So definitely wanted to note that as well.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I don't have any further next steps for staff either. Dr. Estes, we welcome your thoughts on this discussion. Any questions or thoughts, insights before we move forward?
Yeah, I will just add, we just had such a very rich discussion, and it builds upon your conversation back in July and even in December. And the list that Joyce provided isn't the end all be all. There's an opportunity to continue to iterate, and I think that's important to acknowledge. But also important to acknowledge is how we have to look at what is something that is feasible in the moments that we are in, what is something that could be intermediate term, and what is something that might be more long term. And understanding the capacity of state agencies and departments in kind of this bigger picture, as well as are there things that we can even do? There are things that state staff are beholden to, and that we have to be mindful of. So really that feasibility study. So taking all these and working with our team and following up with subject matter experts about, really where are the levers in doing this type of data work? And is it something that we can do now? What are those, recommendations that can happen now because we know they're actionable versus this going to take a little bit more training or a little bit more time and opportunity to support, a lot more accountability, for example. It takes time to build in those accountability structures, for example. So just wanting to acknowledge that the framework is not a one and done, but really how do we continue to build upon this work in the long term so that it is sustainable and it does become the values that we live within California government and throughout the state. And just wanting to say that and acknowledge that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Estes. Okay, I think we have come to the end of our agenda. We'll move forward to item number 9, which is adjournment. So before we adjourn, I would like to say thank you to the Racial Equity Commission staff. Thank you, Commissioner Richardson, and to the public for joining us today. Also, just want to reiterate our profuse thanks to all of the panelists who share such rich content with us. And that brings us to meeting adjournment. May we adjourn the meeting by common consent?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you again for joining us today. The next meeting of the commission will be the Framework Development Committee meeting, followed by the full commission meeting on March 20th in Imperial County, California. And with that, we are adjourned at 5:01 p.m. It's 1 minute late. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Commissioner Matthews, for facilitating.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.